We see parts that are put together in a harmonious way in order to serve a functional purpose. And so Paley used the pocket watch as an analogy to point to the complexities that we see in the world around us and how these things seem to be engineered for their specific purposes.
You talk about the fine-tuned universe. When I do public speaking now about my new book, Is Atheism Dead?, I often ask the audience, how many people are familiar with the fine-tuned argument? Very few people. And these are intelligent people. At least they tell me they're intelligent because I ask, are you intelligent? But they haven't heard of this. And I think, wow. So educated Christians have not heard about the fine-tuned argument, which is just tremendously compelling. So tell my audience, what is the fine-tuned argument, and give us some specifics if you would.
Yeah, so the fine-tuning argument essentially says that there are parameters of the cosmos that are finely tuned within an infinitesimal, tiny, tiny range in order for life to have arisen anywhere in the universe. And then on top of that, there are things about planet Earth that have made our planet incredibly hospitable to the emergence and development of life. And then on top of that, we have this crazy, what some might call sheer coincidence, but we know better. That's such that things are so finely tuned cosmically and on our planet, and they just happen to coincide with the exact same conditions we need to be the case in order for scientific discovery to be possible. So it's this habitability, discoverability, coincidence that's so wonderful.
I think maybe the reason a lot of people don't know about this is that it sounds complicated, right? And so what are some of these parameters? What examples can we give so that people get what we're talking about? You know, if things weren't, if it's the Goldilocks thing. This is too hot. This is too cold. This is just right. What are some examples that we can throw out there? I mean, I've got a few, but maybe you do.
Well, from a cosmic perspective, from the cosmic level, we could point to things like the force of gravity. So the gravitational constant that tells us how strong or weak the gravitational force is. And it turns out that if it were modified in either direction, stronger or weaker, just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, we could not even have chemistry in the universe. And one of the illustrations I like to use with my students is, imagine you had a cosmic tape measure. You went down to Home Depot, you got a big old tape measure, and you were able to stretch it across the entire observable universe, which is quite a long way. And imagine that one tick mark on your tape measure represented the known gravitational constant in the law of nature that we refer to as the force of gravity. Now imagine you moved that tick mark just 1 inch in either direction on your tape measure, and that would render the universe life prohibiting. So if you can just wrap your mind around the size of the observable universe compared to an inch on a tape measure.
By the way, no one can. You know about this.
Right.
You're using terms. People don't, they say, what does she mean, observable universe? So how big is the observable? When we're talking about a tape measure, it's really, 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 really long. How long is it? From here to the moon is 250,000 miles. So from here to the sun is 93 million miles. You're talking about something almost infinitely beyond that.
Right. We're talking about trillions of light years. And for those that don't know what a light year is, it's how far you could travel if you were going at the speed of light for a year.
Okay, so but I'm saying even if it were just from here to the sun, let's say the tape measure is 93 million miles long. Who can imagine 1 million miles, right? I mean, it's just crazy stuff. It's 3,000 miles across the country. Now try to imagine 1 million miles. Now try to imagine millions and millions. So you have a tape measure that long, and you're saying you move 1 inch in either direction on that tape measure, we can't have chemistry. We can't have life. Now, so
you can't have gases compressing enough to give you anything resembling a star.
And who wants that kind of a universe? Be pretty dark. Okay, so here's my question. Why aren't they teaching this? This is science. in like public schools and colleges. This is science. This is not Christian science. This is science. We know. Or am I missing something? Are there people that say this is not true? I don't think there really are people that we can take seriously that would say this is not true. They know this is true, but they don't teach it. Why? Does it just make them uncomfortable?
I guess I figure it hedges too closely to philosophy and religion, and so they just avoid it. But you're exactly right. The fine-tuning of the universe is not a controversial claim by any means. What's controversial is claiming that it points to a transcendent mind.
Right. The only problem is that even though that's controversial, it's also true, which is a problem for people who don't like it to be true, so they just call it controversial and ignore it. But if you stick your head in the sand, ultimately, at some point, really, that strategy can't work. So that's the fine-tuned universe. What about planet Earth? What are some things that are more tangible that people can say? Because when you talk, for example, about the gravitational force, most of us just go like, I'm not sure what that even is, right? I mean, I know that in physics there are 4 fundamental forces. They each have, a certain value, and that was set in stone a millionth of the second after the Big Bang. And the more you know, the more it makes sense, the more crazy it is. But what's something more tangible, like maybe the size of the Earth?
Yeah, the distance of the Earth from the sun is in that Goldilocks region that you referred to. We're in just the right spot to have liquid water, which is essential for the emergence and flourishing of life. One of my favorite examples that is part of that great coincidence of discoverability and habitability is the existence of fire on our planet. It did not have to be the case that we are able to have controlled hot fire that enables us to flourish technologically. And the things that are necessary for the kind of fire we have turn out to also be necessary for the existence of life. And one example of that would be the electromagnetic force constant. Another example would be precisely the kind of atmosphere we have on planet Earth. And then another thing for fire specifically are the kinds of raw elements that we have. So we have these parameters that give us both life, specifically higher complex life, and fire that leads to technological advancement, which is necessary to do the natural sciences. And I think that's wonderful.
Even at this simple level, though, you can see how it could be difficult for people because it sounds. The more you get into it, which is why I want people to read and learn about this, is the more you get into it, the more you understand it. But we're dealing with a world where very few people know about this, but they're starting to know about it. We'll be right back talking to Melissa Cain Travis. The book is in my hand, Science in the Mind of the Maker.
So the central thesis of my book, Science in the Mind of the Maker, is something that I call the Maker Thesis. And this goes beyond the idea that science gives us evidence that points towards an intelligent creator. What I mean when I say the Maker Thesis is that when we look at diverse branches of the natural sciences, we actually see marks of rationality in all of these different areas of science. But in addition to that, and corresponding to it quite beautifully, is the fact that we have inquisitive, higher intelligent life on planet Earth whose rationality is attuned in just the right way to be able to detect the rationality in nature.
Okay, now, I hate to break it to you, but that might make sense to you, and it might even make sense to me, but that's not easy what you just said, because I remember Hugh Ross, who introduced me to a lot of this stuff, when he was talking about this. I think it was on this program like 5 years ago or something. I remember thinking like, that's a complex idea. So let's break this down. When you even talk about something like rationality, I think a lot of people go like, what do you mean exactly by rationality? I think it's a deep philosophical issue, isn't it? Like when you're saying that if I look at the world of science, the idea that it is somehow understandable is itself so taken for granted. It seems so innate to me that it's hard for me to step outside and marvel at it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it totally does. So back in the mid-20th century, a physicist by the name of Eugene Wigner wrote an essay that has since become quite famous. Now, it's important to understand that Wigner was not a theist in any sense of the word. We could probably best describe him as a happy agnostic. But he wrote this essay. It's freely available to read online. And the title of the essay is The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. And what he did was he explored something that Albert Einstein had remarked about repeatedly, but just had not elaborated on. And that was the mathematical comprehensibility of the universe. And Wigner, over just the course of maybe 4 pages of an essay, he talks about how crazy this is, how uncanny it is that the abstract world of mathematics would map onto nature in just the right way that we are able to use advanced mathematics to do things like theoretical physics and particle physics.
Okay, but what I was saying earlier, which is that I think unless you're a really deep thinker who thinks about what you just said, we sort of take these things for granted because they seem so intuitive, so obvious. I mean, if I'm made by God to long for meaning, the idea that I long for meaning and then find meaning and find reason and find answers, whatever, it seems normal, and it is. So it's hard for me to step outside of it and try to imagine a world where that weren't true. Imagine a world that wasn't rationally comprehensible. To try to imagine a world where there are creatures like us who didn't long for reason and meaning. It gets into some deep philosophical waters is what I'm trying to say. And so whenever I hear somebody talk about it, it's amazing that math, enables us, that we can do math and we can study science through math and stuff like that. There's a part of me that just goes like, well, what do you mean? Of course we can do that. But what you're saying, which Wigner is saying, which Einstein was seeing, is like, no. If you really look at it, it's freaky. It's kind of weird that math somehow can be mapped onto this natural world. Math is abstract. The natural world is the opposite of abstract. And so, but this is deep stuff. It's just letting you know. What sounds like very easy to you, this is heavy.
It really is. To give a more recent example that I think is rather fun is the great Roger Penrose. And for those who don't know that name, he's a famous living physicist. He rose to fame mostly for his work with the late, great Stephen Hawking. And Penrose has something, it's a triangular model that he refers to as the 3 worlds, 3 mysteries problem. Now, Penrose, also not a theist, but he sees the great problem here with trying to posit a natural explanation based on what we know right now. And the reason he calls it the 3 worlds, 3 mysteries problem is because he says, look, we have this world of abstract mathematics, completely immaterial. It maps onto the material world with mind-boggling precision. And then out of that material world, now here's his naturalistic perspective coming out of the material world has emerged human rationality.
You said Roger Penrose, this great mind, he say it again so we get that third piece because it's heavy.
Okay, so let me just put it in very, very simple terms. I won't be as articulate as Dr. Penrose is on this. We have mathematics, we have matter, and we have mind. And those 3 things relate to one another with what I call a grand cosmic resonance. There is this relationship between the 3 that is rather spooky. And we need to have an explanation for this. And naturalism doesn't have the tools to give us that explanation.
Okay, so he gets that it doesn't make sense naturalistically. Something's missing. There's a mystery here. So, okay,
yeah.
So we have the world of math, totally abstract. We have the world of nature, material, okay. And then we have, you're saying he calls it mind. Does he mean mind or does he mean brain? Or is he himself having trouble figuring? I'm getting the impression that he is himself troubled as he tries to figure this out.
Oh, he is troubled by it. And it wasn't very long ago that he had a really interesting dialogue with Dr. William Lane Craig. And Dr. Craig tried to pin him down on this and make a suggestion that theism offers a more satisfactory explanation of the three worlds, three mysteries problem that it has so long fascinated Dr. Penrose. And to talk to Bill Craig, it's interesting to hear that he thought Penrose was pretty open-minded to exploring that path. So we'll see.
It's so fascinating because we're living in really exciting times that we're able to see these things and talk about these things. I mean, Einstein 100 years ago was just sort of sniffing at this mystery, and years and years later, you have somebody like Roger Penrose really looking at it and saying it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. Right. I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, Einstein repeatedly in newspaper interviews, in essays, and so on and so forth, he repeatedly used the word miracle. He said, we should not expect to have a comprehensible universe. And so that should tell us something.
A comprehensible universe. I mean, even like, again, right. I'm saying it, all of us have grown up with a comprehensible universe. So we can't even imagine the concept of the comprehensibility of the universe. We have to step outside and it takes a great mind like an Einstein or a Penrose to think about the comprehensibility of the universe. It's not so easy, but it's important. I want to get, before we go, because we don't have a lot of time, but chapter 6 is called A Death Knell for Design Arguments, Natural Theology, and Darwin's Response. Can you talk about that? Because I love this.
Sure. So the whole natural theology movement, for those that don't know what natural theology is, it's this idea that we can use our God-given reason, because we're made in the image of God, to look at nature and discern an intelligent mind behind all of creation. And natural theology really started enjoying a heyday in the late 18th and early 19th century. Listeners may be familiar with the name Paley, William Paley, who was very famous for his clockmaker argument. And we don't have time to go into that, but the idea being that when we come across a contrivance, a human-made contrivance, we see parts that are put together in a harmonious way in order to serve a functional purpose. And so Paley used the pocket watch as an analogy to point to the complexities that we see in the world around us and how these things seem to be engineered for their specific purposes. Well, this was huge, and his book went into reprint after reprint after reprint. We had this big heyday of natural theology, and then boom, 1859, Charles Darwin publishes his famous book on the origin of species. And the narrative now tends to be, well, when Darwin's work came along, it destroyed the project of natural theology, and Paley looked like a dunce. But that turns out to not be the real story. Even great supporters of Darwin, scientific supporters of Darwin, like the American Asa Gray, who thought evolution by natural selection was a theory that was on the right track, still said it was absurd to think that this in any way undermined design argumentation. They said, if anything, it makes design argumentation stronger because now we not only have an artificer that can create these complex things designed for great purposes, but he can create mechanisms that design things that are contrived for a great
Asa Gray
purpose.
said that? That's pretty impressive. That is actually, first of all, I haven't heard the word artificer recently, but what a concept. That is an extraordinary concept.